So after we have the co-lead community, we have the jiu-jitsu teams working together, mutually activating each other, reinforcing each other in lateral and both omnidirectional connections. The next question that comes up is what are we doing together? And I think this is an important point because there are several risks down the path. So the first thing that is really helpful, I think, is the operational measures of success that Maria Laura came up with in her work with unions in the US. And in at least 3 different levels, it's important to think of the following. The work that the Jiu-Jitsu partners are doing and that we're contributing with, I think the first level that is important for us to consider is the fact that to which extent are they connecting with their constituents based on this new Everyone a Changemaker framework, and also helping us connect directly or indirectly with their constituents on the basis of this new framework. The second one is to what degree they've started to internalize this framework themselves in their organization, the way that they work. And the last one, which is also logically the third one, is to what extent they've started to publicly position themselves as the ones that are leading this effort and speaking publicly and influencing public conversations based on their alignment with the Everyone a Changemaker framework. So this last point is important because they will only change the basis of competition and then have a rippling effect in their industries if they are able to position themselves publicly and advocate for why this is important. So the bottom line is as if you need to have both elements. So the elements of the message, but also the element of ethos. So the things that they are doing differently in their practice, but also how are they talking about it differently. And once we have both of those, then we're on the right track. The example we have of the Sumaré Ed School in Brazil is a good example because it started with them realizing that they weren't prepared for this new framework, although they understood it was important and they wanted to play big in promoting that. So the first thing they did is they figured out how do we change our practices, and then they engaged their students, they engaged their professors in a different way to start this conversation. Once it started producing results, practical results, like changing the course curriculum, changing their internship programs for students, changing the way that they organized as a team, then they started feeling confident enough to talk about this publicly, to share their journey, to explain why this is so critical and why every ed school should be like this, even to the extent that they started communicating this as the form of a new inequality. So if faculties of education in the future and currently don't prepare themselves for this, in the future they will be missing out on this opportunity and they will be leaving their students, their graduates behind. So that is very important that they reach that point where then it's public. So these 3 elements, these 3 operational measures are kind of the direct measures of their work. Of course, it's indirectly, it shows our impact, but it's their work, it's their leadership, it's them driving it, of course, with our support and our contribution. But it's important for us to realize that this is not us doing it. We shouldn't be the ones driving it because there's a risk of doing service delivery and of kind of creating a myriad of programs and initiatives based on kind of the demand coming from them, which is not the best place for us to be in. So we just need to be careful about that. And this is kind of the first category of things that the Jiu-Jitsu partners will do themselves. There's this big second category of things that responds to the how-to and to what we're going to do, which has to do with the things that Ashoka has already figured out. And a big group of these things has to do with the 4 drivers. So the 4 drivers are ways in which we can orient our partnership with these teams in a way that first it helps us identify, recognize, and support Ashoka young change makers from 12 to 20 that are themselves leading change-making initiatives and very especially engaging others, wanting others to be as powerful as they are and being co-leaders of this movement. So that is one very critical piece. The second piece is the Lead Young Stories. So making sure that we can offer this as an opportunity, not just to distribute these stories amongst these partners, but to find very creative ways in which it can be tied into and embedded in the strategies, in the operationalization of these partners themselves. The third one is the peer-to-peer allies. So it's of course it's a more kind of internal way in which the AYCers are interconnected and support each other, but it's also an interesting architecture that many of the jiu-jitsu partners can help leverage, they can help support, they can help fund, they can help make it more dynamic, more sophisticated depending on the context. So that's another important opportunity. And the fourth one is your kids. So it's being able to have a conversation with the group of people that are the most concerned, the most motivated and interested in making sure that kids are not left behind, which are their parents, their caretakers, all the adults that care about their children, and making sure that we can have a conversation with them so that they can think about, reflexively about their experience as their parenting experiences, but having the Ashoka Young Changemakers be the ones that are driving that conversation, that become the examples, and that they can share their journeys with them, so that it becomes a very strong and compelling conversation that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do if it's just us talking about it and driving it. Now, the Four Drivers has that element of not only there's a purpose in themselves that is part of kind of how Ashoka is building this Everyone Achieve movement, but there's also a purpose in making it much more sophisticated and much more systemic impact our engagement with the Jiu-Jitsu partners if we're able to embed these Four Drivers into the Jiu-Jitsu partnerships. And I think this logic of embedding is very important, because otherwise we would go into kind of the stovepiping mentality of saying, well, we should be thinking of these Four Drivers as four programs that we are the ones driving alone, and that they have a process and then and a team and managing team and all of that, and then it becomes very rigid, it becomes vertical. It's like Ashoka with the program in a vertical relationship, and not something that is horizontal and that is conducive of other relationships. So for that, at least in our experience, what has helped is to approach the Four Drivers much more from the point of their the principles behind their design. So what is it in the essence of these ideas of these drivers that makes them that gives it their nature? So for instance, with your kids, the element of the most interested and motivated group, which are the parents, that's an important design principle. The other one is the participation of the AYCers, but there are other design elements that have to do with the more kind of pioneering work that Vipin in the US has been leading around parenting change makers, which is a broader conversation about the role of parents, their role as change makers, and also recognizing what the parents are already doing collectively and so on. So I think it's important to approach them, the Four Drivers, without forgetting about their design principles, because that's the why behind them, that's what makes them rich and powerful, and it allows us to kind of creatively adapt these drivers depending on where we're doing this, and also depending on the partnerships that we have. It also helps us, because we're focused on the design principles, to adapt creatively in strategic partnerships so that we can raise funds and connect with resource partners to make this much more impactful and spread. Because we're not designing it as a stovepiped program, but as a logic and a series of design principles that give it its vitality and its essence. And finally, there are all a series of other elements that Ashoka already has that has to do with our broader ecosystem that we've been building, over these more than almost 4 decades, which has to do with all the other constituents. So the AS centers, the E2s, of course our fellows, which we already mentioned, but all the other partners, the fellows that work with school systems, with young people, with children, the impact that they have themselves also, and a series of communication and marketing tools. There are at least 11 that we've mapped so far that we already use and that we could also make use of in developing these jiu-jitsu partnerships, in supporting the Four Drivers, and vice versa. So So to summarize, it's, I think, these four elements. So the jiu-jitsu partnerships, what they're already doing, what they can create that is new, that they are the ones driving, we're just supporting, and the four drivers is a big cluster of our work. And the last one is all the other elements and ideas that are part of the Ashoka ecosystem that we can tap into in order to advance the big game.